We, in terms of the Long Island Sound recovery and the efforts that have been made by the study by our National Estuary Program, many groups in this room over the last quarter century, and where does that stand in terms of climate change? So this map, which most of you are familiar with, is what we lovingly call our dead zone map. It's the image of how often we have low oxygen problems, not only in the Western Sound, but all the way into the Center Sound. And it's important just to remember that 25 years ago, scientists got together and asked a really critical question, which is, what is the single most important ecological problem that we face in Long Island Sound? And after years of modeling and research and study, the conclusion was this problem right here. Because the red area up there indicates areas where 90 to 100% of the time over the last quarter century, there's been very low oxygen in the Sound. And moving on from there, you know, the yellow areas are the vast majority of the time, 2/3 or more of the time is very little oxygen. And as you see, it continues all the way to New Haven. And why is that so critical? It was interesting to go back and read some of the work that was done a decade or more ago in identifying the fact that all the creatures we love, all of the living things in the Sound, are suppressed by this one problem. And that's why we call it a limiting factor. That's really the definition itself. So, with that in mind, the question comes up, what have we done about it? Well, we set a goal collectively. EPA Region 1, EPA Region 2, the governors of both states, all signed on to a legally binding agreement under the Clean Water Act about 20 years ago that set a goal for 2014 to have a 58.5% reduction in what I call too much of a good thing. It is the nutrients that are so great for our gardens that help every plant on earth grow, but the nutrients being in too great an amount coming into the Sound, resulting in too much plant life, too much small algae, then blooming in the Sound and sinking down to the bottom of the Sound and literally sucking all of the, or most of the oxygen out of that western part of the Sound. So what have we done? How have we done in terms of meeting that target? Well, this is a chart that shows you from 1995 to 2011, a period of about 15 years, how the reduction has gone in sewage treatment plants. Because in the Sound, the vast majority of our nitrogen comes out of our sewage treatment plants. And it's something that we can correct, it's something we can treat, we can extract that nutrient out, but it requires a significant investment. And what this graph shows you is that actually, if you look at the blue bar, which is Connecticut, you see that that has shrunk very substantially. As a matter of fact, Connecticut now is very close to meeting that 58% reduction. But if you do the numbers, you'll see that New York, as of the end of 2011, had actually a long way to go. We were about 30% reduction, where we have a 58.5% reduction goal. So we're only about halfway on the New York side. So what does that mean? It means that over the next few years, because we just have a few years to do this, we have to pay very close attention to the capital plans in New York. We have to celebrate, as we did this spring when the Hunts Point huge sewage treatment plant was upgraded in New York, and that the physical part of that upgrade was done. There's now going to be a treatment phase they're going to enter into in another year or so. But we have to celebrate when we make progress, and we have to, just like you were talking about with Art, hold everyone accountable to meeting these goals. So that's a critical important point. It's also interesting reading back at the predictions, the modeling. There's been an extensive investment by our National Estuary Program in modeling to say what would happen if we achieve those goals. And that modeling indicates that we would really shrink down this red area, shrink down the yellow area, start to change the entire Sound much more towards blue. So let's just take a quick look at what happened last summer. This is Long Island Sound, Connecticut DEEP monitoring for 2 days last summer, August 14th to 16th. And it actually shows a real acute, serious problem. That black area in the very western sound, very close to where we are, really off New Rochelle, meant that there was virtually no oxygen. It meant that if creatures didn't get out of there, they would die or come up right to the surface where there was oxygen. And serious, serious problems extending all the way to New Haven. So why, after we have reduced nitrogen so much, we've already taken out about 40% or so of the nitrogen, why such a problem last summer? Well, this starts to get a little bit towards changing weather patterns, changing climate. Last summer, probably many of you remember that the Millstone power plant, we had to shut down one of the reactors. Why? Because the water was the warmest it had ever been in Long Island Sound, 78.5 degrees. When the engineers designed Millstone back in the 60s, they did not believe that it was possible for the water of Long Island Sound to get over 75 degrees. And of course, we're seeing these major changes. We wish that was a single event. What we're seeing in the Sound, and I see Penny back here, who's worked for many, many years. Penny, just raise your hand for a second. Penny Howell, who is a wonderful marine biologist who's been doing work for us for years, marine fisheries person, and she has discovered that the whole fish community is changing here in the Sound. I do see her shaking her head. Yes, I apparently have that right. We have many more warm water species now, very few cold water species. So we wish it was just a one-time event, this change, but Penny's saying no. Unfortunately, that's not the truth, Curt. So what can we do in terms of thinking about flooding? What can we do? Because this is a sewage treatment plant issue. It happens at the plant. This is actually an image of Rhode Island, Cranston, Rhode Island, an event that probably no one here remembers. It was April 3rd, 2010. It was the worst flooding in that section. This is rainwater flooding. About 7-8 inches of rain in Rhode Island in a period of about 10 to 12 hours. It completely overwhelmed all kinds of systems, but this was a major one. The sewage treatment plant in Cranston, underwater. So there was a period of days and days where people literally could not flush the toilet in their house, or they had major, major problems in Rhode Island. Fortunately, this did not occur in Long Island Sound to this extent. However, I was just talking to my friends at the Norwalk Land Trust, and they reminded me that in Norwalk, this is just one of many events that happened. There was a pump station that was out for about 3 days, low-lying pump station. So it's not just the sewage treatment plants. It's a question of what can we do to flood-proof the critical infrastructure that allows us to continue to process all of this sewage and all of this nitrogen. Critically important. You know, is this something that we can use FEMA mitigation funding for? Is this something that we can use some of the $500 million of EPA post-Sandy money that has been identified for Region 2 at least, New York and New Jersey, for critically important question. Another simple goal of the study for years is to make the Sound safe for swimming, for kayaking, for clamming, for sailing, so that if you're in a boat, or falling out of a boat, or swimming off a boat, or off a beach, or doing any of these activities we love, it is safe for human health. So what's been happening in Long Island Sound over the last, say, 20 years, 93 to 2012? So what's been happening with beach closure days? Beach closure days means each number is one day that one beach is closed because of too high bacteria counts above the standards. The standards have not changed, by the way, in New York and Connecticut over that time period. And unfortunately, as you see, we're seeing a very disturbing upward tick in numbers of beach closures. Obviously, 2011, again, very much tied to Irene, huge, huge storm event. But if you look at 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, nearly 1,000 beach closure days a year. Again, this is partially climate. We're having these huge downbursts coming more intensely. We've read about that. We're living into that. We're experiencing it. It's having an effect. But it's not just a climatic issue. It's also a what condition are our sewer pipes in. And these are just an indication of what can happen to old, in this case clay, pipes over time, and obviously cracked and broken. But we can see in the bottom photograph that it can still move sewage through the pipes. But what happens when there's rain? What happens when all of the water is also infiltrating into our stormwater pipes at the same time? What's happening is everything's mixing together. The sewage is mixing with groundwater, which is being forced out into the environment. Every time we come close to a river system, we're seeing this stuff come out. So it is a major, major problem. One of the reasons why I mentioned this problem in particular is because thanks to Bob Furnichel. Bob, where are you? Just raise your hand. Bob has done a wonderful study with the county looking at what is the condition of the pipes in Westchester. And what we're finding, unfortunately, is in 4 or 5 of our communities here in Westchester, including where we're standing today here in New Rochelle, that over half the days that Bob looked at, he looked at conditions of flow over a 2-year period. Over half the days here in New Rochelle, we are getting excess flows going into the sewage treatment plant. They can only really be described, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, by problems with infiltration. And so we have a major INI, what's called INI in engineers' term, problem, which is also resulting in major, major bacterial problems. By the way, it's also giving Bob headaches in terms of meeting the nitrogen limits, because if you have all this excess flow coming into your sewage treatment plants, it makes it very difficult to deal with that problem as well. Stress septic systems in storm-prone areas, a major, major problem. You know, the left-hand image of extremely failed septics, showing septic right on the surface. The right being down in Chalker Beach in Old Saybrook. This is a beach community that suffered greatly, a lot of beach erosion, a lot of erosion of sediment, which exposed, by the way, scores of septic systems that were already stressed, already problematic. So what are we going to do in those areas? And is this a FEMA mitigation opportunity? Is this something that our communities should be investing post-Sandy money in? We would argue in the study, absolutely yes, because fixing those problems is also fixing the sound and protecting human health all at the same time. Finally, I'll end with this slide. This is a slide about restoring and protecting. This is an image taken, actually, Bob Lorenz, who took this photograph, was standing on the embankment. About 2 feet behind him, literally on that embankment, was the Amtrak Northeast rail line, okay? And down to his left, he's standing right on the edge of a bridge that goes over Bride Brook, which obviously part of a really important piece of transportation infrastructure. What this is an image of is the 120 people that gathered to save the sound to replant this dune that was reestablished and rebuilt over a recently restored Bride Brook. This is just an exemplar of probably 20 active restoration projects similar to this that are going on at any one time in Long Island Sound. And the reason I mention this is after they were done and was planted, then came along 2 major storms. This last storm chewed up most of that dune. However, had that dune not been restored, we probably would have lost that Amtrak bridge for perhaps the most important piece of transportation infrastructure in the Northeast that is susceptible to flooding. So it's a way of saying that restoring should go hand in hand with protecting. By the way, that little Bride Brook used to have about 60,000 fish going up and down it. Last week, in one night, because of this restoration, largely, it had 100,000 fish in a single night. We're probably going to be up to 400,000 fish this year. But it's a point saying that we can work with nature, we can work with natural systems, whether they're dunes, whether they are restoring the marshes that are sponges for flood, whether it's oyster reefs to protect our communities, These all have to be involved with restoring life in the sound and protecting.